Dr. Hantman, Jeannie, was my partner for 30 years, my wife of 25 years. She died on November 17th, and I'm in mourning. I want to make some of her papers more available. Many of them are in journals, and some are available on the PEP web and elsewhere. But I guess my favorite of her papers, she never published. I urged her to do so, as have other people, but for whatever reason it never was published. So I'm going to read it now, and I'm going to create a section on my website at doncarveth.com for her work, and this will be posted to that before too long. Over the years, I have had requests from people on my YouTube channel to do something on BPD, borderline personality disorder. I never did that because I always considered Jeannie to be the expert in that area, and she certainly was. She liked working with borderlines. Maybe they didn't necessarily all like, well, I think they did like working with her because she really helped them. I find them pretty annoying, and I think it's best that I stay away from working with that category. We all have our strengths and weaknesses as therapists, and I think BPD is certainly one of my weaknesses, but it certainly was one of Jeannie's strengths. So her paper is called Charm and Alarm, because that's what they do. They charm and then they alarm. Borderline Personality Disorder by Jean Hantman. Sometimes she called herself Jean Carveth. 1953 to 2025. Epigram at the beginning. No one has more tricks and less playfulness. No one has more tricks and less playfulness than the BPD. 1. In order to feel safe, not crazy, the borderline is driven to make others feel crazy. This is emotional induction, or interpersonal projective identification, is used to put the craziness into the other. As soon as this is achieved, she is relieved temporarily. A. Charm. She or he can detect what others want to feel. She or he is able to detect what others want to feel or think about themselves. And she becomes, or he becomes, irresistible to the target. Okay, they can detect how other people want to feel and how they want others to feel about them. And once the target is so induced, once they give the other the feelings that they detect the other wants, then they're able to relax. This intuitiveness is often described as uncanny. They make themselves irresistible. They detect what you want to feel or want others to feel about you. They then give you those feelings, and they become irresistible. And they have this uncanny ability to do this. That's charm. Second, alarm. A horror movie. She swings abruptly to whatever is completely opposite in order to fill him with everything her life is. All the murderous torment she is brilliantly connected during the charm phase, that she brilliantly concealed, that is. Okay, so now comes the alarm. Suddenly, abruptly, she fills you with all of the horrible torment that she managed to completely conceal during the charm phase. The rug is pulled out suddenly. Loss of balance, immediate. One crashes to the floor, shaken, disturbed. The target is now filled with confusion, terror, frustration, helplessness, and self-doubt. And he is speechless, because up to this point, it had been pleasurable and exciting and comfortable, or challenging in a way he likes, or beautiful and pitiful, for example, if the target is a social worker. Now he's surprised, tongue-tied, frightened, deflated. And it's the first time he's experienced anything like it. It has to be new for the target. It has to be new for the target for it to work. In other words, with experience, the target becomes less captured. At that point, having alarmed her target of the hour, the borderline is calm. In fact, she feels pretty good. And she's unconscious of this whole thing. This is not consciously done. She doesn't understand what's the matter. What's wrong with you? She asks her victim. She isn't a psychopath, but so close. Close to being one, but not one. The borderline is much more unconscious and suffers all the time. They have been described as failed psychopaths. Psychopaths have no amnesia. They plan similar routines as the borderline, but they do so consciously, carefully. And they observe themselves enacting the game. Even saying, "What's wrong with you?" will have been part of their plan in the case of the psychopath. But the borderline is genuinely confused. Unfortunately for the borderline, there's no such self-awareness. They are as confused as their target about what just unfolded while feeling calm and rational. if confronted, they might guess they were temporarily, quotes, possessed. An external force is responsible. As the other recovers, the borderline becomes deflated. As the other person, the target, recovers, the borderline becomes deflated. But deflated in a way that is desirable, having without thought devised new ways to alarm, being impossible to resist, unless you have sufficient paranoia in general. See below. In other words, she's distinguishing between too much paranoia and not enough paranoia. Some people are too paranoid, some people are not paranoid enough. The paranoid Jews got out of Germany in time. By the way, Jeannie's critique of me is that I suffered from insufficient paranoia, and she was right about that. I maybe thought she suffered from a little too much paranoia. Sidecar. A parent who is borderline feels crazy and in danger, especially when alone with a baby. She needs to alarm the baby. The baby is startled, over time frightened, anticipating. The mother sees her alarm, sees the baby's alarm, and the fear in the baby, and the mother calms down because now the baby is the one in danger. So her own sense of danger is projected into the baby and induced in the baby. A borderline parent is annoyed by an easygoing child. A borderline parent is annoyed by an easygoing child, or an easygoing person, or an easygoing therapist. She is also annoyed because she's unconscious after succeeding at her mission to unsettle and frighten the baby. Does the baby have reflux? Is the baby on the spectrum? She wonders. Her feeling of being in danger, out of control, returns. The patient repeats, "Life is scary, sweet little baby." A narcissistic, subtitle, all narcissists split. All narcissists split. Borderline personality is often described as the splitting disorder. I'm bad, you're good. You're bad, I'm good. This is a misunderstanding of the narcissistic disorders. All narcissists split. It's basically the definition of narcissism. Pre-ambivalence, the state of mind before ambivalence is achieved. Ambivalence is the ability to overcome splitting and to hold that there's one object that is both good and bad instead of two objects, one good, one bad. Narcissists are pre-ambivalent. Well, I think we're all narcissists, but there is a difference between narcissism on the PS pre-ambivalent level as opposed to the more ordinary, we could say neurotic narcissism of people who have achieved the depressive reparative position. The difference is that the borderlines shifts are swift, dramatic, and involve others. Their splitting is swift, extreme, and it involves other people. The hysteric also splits dramatically, but the target is his body. The relationship is with himself as opposed to with others. Difference between hysteric and borderline. Borderline involves others in the splitting. The hysteric involves himself and his relation to his body. But all unconscious narcissists, avoidant, psychotic, dependent, borderline, somatizer, psychopath, normopath, schizoid, bipolar, they all split. Exposed in infancy and childhood to particular kinds of repeated, ritualized environmental failures, narcissists, no matter how high functioning, as older children and young adults, they split. In other words, those who are frozen before language is acquired are incapable of either defining or recognizing ambivalence. Frozen before language, incapable of defining or recognizing ambivalence. This narcissistic dynamic is easier to observe in large group behavior. For example, we're good, the people in that other country are bad. Splitting is seen as the defining symptom of any ongoing extremism, such as women are good, men are bad, Republicans are evil, Democrats are saintly, etc. But there is a difference between the type of splitting we see in BPD and that characteristic of other types of narcissism. The borderline swings from good to bad and bad to good are frequent, rapid, startling, and include another person, in contrast to those whose conflicts are a struggle between opposing internal objects. Borderline, it's a struggle between self and others. It's not a struggle so much within the self. The sudden shift makes it alarming. It feels dangerous, although there is no real danger almost always. The borderline doesn't know how to hide the way other narcissistic types do. Borderline doesn't know how to hide the way other narcissistic types do. They are fully exposed to the world with little self-knowledge, no self, and tortured. The target learns that the borderline's request is, please help me maintain instability. Instability. The other is perceived as awful and disappointing when he's nice. He's perceived as awful and disappointing when he's nice, when he wants to provide a safe environment in which to connect. The borderline is threatened by safe space, threatened by connection. Connection is unbearable. They hate safe spaces. And they do all kinds of things to make it unsafe and unpleasant and quickly as possible. Okay? They hate safe spaces. They want to make it unsafe and unpleasant as quickly as possible. Don't be consistently nice to a borderline unless your intention is to drive him or her away. You want them to go, be nice. The safe space group therapy setting is basically an opportunity for the borderline to demolish all of the sympathetic, warm attunement being offered. Because of the speed and frequency of changes in position and mood, borderline personality is the most likely to encourage those who know her to question their sanity, even their desire to go on living. Okay, this is the effect they can have. They can have the therapist question his or her sanity or even his or her desire to go on living. If alarming were all she could do, if she lacked that remarkable ability to charm, she would have no one, because she is no one. She has no self, only dark compulsion. Over time, the effect of anyone's disorder directed at another is boredom. Over time, the effect that they have ultimately is boredom. What was unpleasurable becomes predictable. What was exciting is now only exhausting. Although they were initially pathologically irresistible, no one becomes more unloved and dreaded than those whose original mission is to invade the soul of another. Okay, no one becomes more unloved and dreaded than those whose mission is to invade the soul of another. This person becomes despised. She'll have to move on. Therapists, be cautious when a client suddenly asks to increase frequency of sessions. That request, coming out of nowhere, is often a message to the therapist. You don't know how to help me. Maybe if I come more often, you won't be so useless. In the case of the borderline, he isn't aware that he has formed this opinion and acted on it, so that he can malign the therapy even more. Let me come more often so I can malign the therapy even more. As it winds down, at the end, she forgets to charm, feeling only weary, endangered, crazy, desperate. Often the BP will attempt to switch to some opposite behavior, something different than what used to work so well. It doesn't work though. A typically shrieking borderline husband calmly whispers, "Elizabeth, He doesn't feel calm. He feels desperate. He's about to lose what he ruined. Elizabeth, come here, please. I'd like to speak to you about something, he says. Throwing the other, knocking the other off guard again, sending a shock of terror through her, because he's never calm and quiet. Is he? Who is he? The last time he alarmed her by becoming very quiet was so long ago that she forgot. No personality has more tricks and less playfulness. There is no sense of humor. Amnesia in the partner is required for the dynamic to go on. Target person has to forget. It's impressive how BPD can spot those who are susceptible, turning away from others. They are cold to anyone impervious to their hypnosis, those who see through them. Often, a family member of their current victim knows as soon as they meet. Some people can see it right off the bat. Nearing the end, because she ruined and defeated too many times, it's often too late to simulate either desire or alarm. The other is going. He's gone. Will the borderline kill herself? Unlikely. See below. The intellectual researcher type is the borderline's soulmate. I think that this intellectual researcher that Jeannie is writing about here is kind of based on moi. Intellectualizing is often used as a resistance against the correct, strong suspicion that this person is going to cause a lot of trouble. The borderline is brilliant at attracting himself to someone whose own defense disorder is intellectualizing. Why? First, at some level, he knows he can't connect, relate, love, attach. The borderline, on some level, knows this. He doesn't even know what these mean, attachment, love. The borderline can only suffer and cause suffering, feel crazy, and induce craziness, charm, then alarm. He finds someone who is attracted to him for some reason other than connection, such as the researcher. Someone who intellectualizes as a defense is often attracted to disorder, to those full of chaotic feelings and disturbing behavior, because she imagines this new client or boyfriend will be fascinating to research. Promiscuity isn't about sex. The common inclusion of promiscuity in the definition of borderline personality disorder should not be confused with sexual promiscuity. What it really means is that to the borderline, everyone is easily and instantly replaceable. To the borderline, everyone is easily and instantly replaceable. That's what promiscuity means in the borderline psychic structure. You're easily replaceable, even though you will be giving the opposite impression or message. They're telling you you're irreplaceable, but you're instantly replaceable. She'll kill herself if you leave, she says. When you do leave the relationship, or refer the client to another therapist, she forgets about you by the end of the day. When you do leave or refer her somewhere else, she forgets about you by the end of the day. For those who take borderline personality on as a project, realizing how quickly they are replaced is often hurtful. Many engaged by borderline prefer desperation over the truth. No suicide, only replacement. Almost immediately, after you invested so much time and energy. They don't really care who they latch onto from 1 month to another, 1 year to another, as long as the person is willing to go along with their requirements, which no one should do, unless feeling unhinged, unstable, and exhausted most of the time is tolerable or wanted. The ones we call the high-functioning borderline. She mesmerizes you in some way, then threatens to kill herself, then disappears. The so-called high-functioning borderline won't say suicide or kill, but will casually threaten something else like quitting or, quotes, taking a break after telling you how great you are, then leaving abruptly after 2 months of therapy. But then the high-functioning mimics sanity and charm. She plays irresistible, and you don't do the killing. For some reason, the target doesn't end the relationship at that point. He keeps working at it. Now that you've figured her out, you imagine, you think your interpretations will have an effect. They don't. The only effect your hard work has is to reassure her that she's gotten you hooked again. All that means is that he knows how to mimic a high-functioning borderline when it's useful to do so. The so-called high-functioning borderline means that his shift from seeing you as fabulous to seeing you as useless or bad takes 2 weeks instead of 2 hours. He's just a bit less predictable because intelligent borderlines are smarter at knocking people off guard. They're high functioning, smarter at knocking people off guard. Then maybe for 2 weeks at the most, he is again your most charming or intelligent, cooperative sounding, or intriguing or beautiful patient, husband, acquaintance, big sister, friend again. One of the most talented, thrilling, exciting, interesting people you've ever known, or in need of help that only you are capable of giving, according to her. One of the approaches to treating borderline personality involves the therapist learning to know and not know at the same time. Jeannie was trained in the Spotnitz school in Philadelphia. Modern Psychoanalysis, they have their own journal called Modern Psychoanalysis, and they specialize in certain techniques that have sometimes been called paradoxical. They have techniques such as joining and mirroring, joining the resistance. They do strategic interventions that regular kosher IPA analysts do not do. And she's describing this, knowing and not knowing at the same time. We say, I'm puzzled, to the borderline patient very often, because borderline patients are puzzled. They say they're puzzled. So we say, I'm puzzled. We are not puzzled. Research into talk therapy approaches shows that acting the patient, thinking with one mind, is powerful. This is joining technique and mirroring technique. One of my own examples of this, the patient is wasting his hours going on and on about how he's my worst patient, he's making no progress, it's so awful for me to have to work with him, he's getting nowhere. And I respond, oh, I'm sorry, I just don't have enough training to be able to help you adequately. I need to go back to school. I've really been letting you down. And suddenly the patient is cheering me up. He's no longer engaged in this savage attack upon himself. He's trying to help me now. So these interventions can sometimes have fairly remarkable effects. So she's saying that these techniques, acting the patient, thinking with one mind, this can be powerful. Verbalizing deranged without acting deranged is a form of therapeutic projective identification. The therapist can speak borderline without being borderline or without feeling anything. Borderline personality, because it always involves other people, is easier to treat than, for example, hysteria, which involves a person and his body. The therapist might say, I'm uneasy. Are we safe? DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, from the little I know about it, is clever, especially regarding structure. The therapist withholding everything until the patient adheres to the structure. No tentative sympathetic gestures from the therapist. The therapist not only knows everything the client is up to, but doesn't hide that from him. Until he stops acting against the structure, threats, disappearing, canceling, the therapist refuses to discuss any other topic. If the client wants to talk about his horrible mother or where he hides his blades, first he has to respect the structure. When it works, acting out is replaced with showing up and talking. Because acting dread by not showing up is replaced with feeling dread and showing up, the client, patient, your BP is rewarded by getting to talk about everything. Like cutting, about hating his sisters, and how persecuted by the therapist she feels. People act out to defend against feeling. When someone who is BP is ordered to stop acting, she'll start feeling. Then she's allowed to talk. This is the insight of DBT. I hope that the followers of Marsha Linehan understand as well as she does. Mostly, I hope that practitioners of any type of therapy learn to assess the difference between hysteria and borderline personality. Because of the political mission to eradicate any acknowledgement of hysteria, those suffering from it are usually tossed into a psychiatric pile with BPD and misdiagnosed. The two are really different. And here's a note on insufficient paranoia. Was I smart today? The target has been induced to wonder, did I talk too loudly? Am I crazy? I feel crazy. This is surreal. Will she leave me? Why do I care? Therapists are especially vulnerable because they're so smart. They study borderline personality. They know the patient, they know the pattern of behavior. They imagine they aren't vulnerable to induction. After the first sudden alarm, therapists who are only mildly interested in self-care, usually the inexperienced, but not always, are the most likely to be certain that this patient no longer has the power to unsettle him. The therapist imagines his guard is up. Of course his guard is up until the borderline knocks him off guard again, suddenly, with some creative, new, irresistible ploy. What a therapist does with this, how it is understood, depends on the therapist's style, her personal tolerance for accepting being targeted, her level of interest in treating people with this disorder. The boundary. It also depends on the therapist's willingness or not to be charmed by things completely unrelated to psychotherapy. A common unspoken wish of both parties is to be free of the boundaries. How we wish we could marry or parent, gain a brother, sister, teacher, friend, colleague, self-help book, Zen master, indeed, instead of show up and talk. We wish to get rid of the boundaries. We wish to have all of these things instead of just showing up and talking. Which personality, diagnosis, or disorder has the best prognosis? The insight-oriented, the neurotic, the educated? None of these are significant. Showing up for the scheduled appointment and talking reveal prognosis. The borderline homeostasis is instability, especially when destabilizing another. He's at his homeostatic state, his best state, when he's destabilizing someone else. This should be distinguished from those whose excitement is derived from challenging authority. Many adolescents will present as borderline, who present as borderline are really teenagers. In other words, they're not really borderline, they're teenagers. They've got authority issues. BP doesn't have a problem with authority, only safety and disrupting safety. The conflict is stability/instability. Ultimately, the therapist or anyone else in relationship with this person needs to answer two questions. One, do I want to turn over some significant portion of my energy and emotional well-being to this person? Two, if I do want to do so, because they are so charming that I'll set aside my basic needs, how long will I continue the relationship if the charm wears off and I feel only dread or boredom and annoyance? Everyone's happy ending. Again, everyone is interchangeable to the borderline. Of all the disorders, the borderline moves on quickest. He often already has, to anyone new and susceptible. They find a new therapist, business partner, new boyfriend. They might affect the drama with his children for a while, or maybe go back home to alarm his mother. The therapist or husband had fretted and worried that something awful would happen if the relationship ended. This is a symptom of the trauma caused by participating in a relationship with a borderline. She did repeatedly threaten suicide, but away from the target, she already has someone lined up to replace him. Dying is the last thing on the borderline's mind. She's on to someone new. Charm and alarm. The one targeted by the borderline can recover quickly, but only by complete disengagement, only by disappearing. The player in danger isn't the borderline. Assuming the therapist humbly considers his narcissistic vulnerability, those who have experienced and ultimately rejected staying in play with the borderline can use what he learned to assess faster. He will embrace paranoia and learn to communicate to the person needing to hear it. He will communicate to the person needing to hear it, you are not in charge. You are not in charge. I'm in charge. You aren't as adorable as you think. Gene Hantman, 2011 and 2018. Well, that will give rise to a million questions, which I myself am not really capable of answering. I wish she was here to be able to answer them.